members, we have taken 25 minutes to consider that topic. We took 55 minutes for the two urgent questions. We're now about to start question 3. Now, just in case anybody thinks question time finishes at 1 o'clock, standing orders provide that tabled questions will be allotted 2.5 hours. So, complying with standing orders, it's my intention that questions will continue after the lunch break till 3:25 p.m. That's the rules, unless, of course, anybody wishes to suspend that provision. Please bear that in mind, and how many of the considerable number of questions that we have, 50 plus, we get through remains to be seen. Question 3, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to ask the Chief Minister what the monitoring process is for each level of the border strategy to ensure compliance.
Chief Minister to reply.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, and I think Mr. Speaker and myself discussed this yesterday, but I'm more than happy to go over in greater detail than I gave him yesterday. And I would firstly stress that my expectation is that the Great Manx public will continue to conscientiously comply with the rules that are in place to protect themselves and others in our community. We will continue to provide clear and regular public communications through multiple channels to reaffirm individuals' obligations and the repercussions of non-compliance. For levels 4 and 3 of the strategy, all persons entering the island will continue to be required to have authorisation to do so. They will be required to provide this authorisation at the ports to confirm their identity. Regular, unscheduled calls will be made to those that have travelled to the island to ensure that they are self-isolating and confirm their understanding of the legal requirements that apply to them. This will also allow welfare checks as to an individual's health. These phone calls will be in addition to unscheduled visits to an individual's place of self-isolation to ensure that they are complying with their legal obligations. As has been the case throughout the COVID-19 pandemic, the public will no doubt raise any concerns of suspected breaches through to the COVID response team, and of course suspected breaches are a matter for the constabulary. Convictions carry a maximum fine of £10,000 or 3 months imprisonment. Currently, from levels 2 onwards, the requirement to self-isolate would be removed. This would represent a significant landmark in the island's journey through the pandemic, and alongside this, the need to monitor such would no longer exist. Thank you.
Supplementary, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. I'd appreciate it if the Chief Minister could perhaps tell us a little bit more about the regular unscheduled calls and phone calls and what's envisaged by that. I think people are starting to be concerned that we've gone from being in a bubble to living in a colander. Cases will have come to members about people going home from the boat via the shops, and perhaps just to ask also, in light of the decision that only the returning resident needs to self-isolate at home, so to home quarantine, but other members of the household can go out. How rigorous is the test and trace regime going to be for family members cohabiting with that returning resident to ensure that we can effectively trace all contacts very quickly if the member of the household, the returning resident, develops COVID-19 symptoms?
Chief Minister.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, and a number of points there raised by the Honourable Member, which I'm happy to answer because I think it's important that we give the reassurance out to the general public. So, under the new combined team working at our ports, it will be government officers carrying out the checks to ensure compliance with the legal obligations, and obviously where if people aren't in the house or answering the phone, obviously there could be a welfare issue, they could be ill, or it could be they're out walking the dog and breaching the regulations, and it will be passed on. We did discuss the quarantine at home issue, which I know, I'm sure all of us, that's been the number one postbag. It wasn't moving from 5 to 4, it was the being able to quarantine at home. And I think information I received from the Minister for Health and Social Care after that debate showed that I think 86% people living in the house with someone who'd come back and was self-isolating, it was 86% of them didn't catch COVID. I think then there was the remaining percentage that caught it elsewhere, and 6% had maybe caught it from the person when they had been infected coming back. So the data shows that the risks are very small. If we look at if we have teachers or business people, if one of you goes away for a business trip and you come back, if that rest of the family are having to be shut down, then that is a great inconvenience and can damage people's work. Equally, if you analyse in March, this is exactly what we did. So our medics look at the infection ratio in the United Kingdom and decide what is an acceptable risk, because everything that we do is a risk. Keeping the drawbridge shut, no flights in, no flights out, no boat in, no boat out, other than for freight, is you could argue, the safest way of doing it, but we clearly cannot do that, and therefore you look at the infection rates, you make a decision based on what is an acceptable risk. Yes, there will be a chance that we will get COVID-19 back on the island, the odd case, but with our testing system in place, our 1-1 call centre in place, our infrastructure built to combat that, we are in a much better place. And I think, based on the evidence from the medics, that we can allow people to self-isolate at home. But as I said before, they must isolate, quarantine in a separate room. They can't mix freely with members of the family. They should wipe down the bathroom if they have to share it, or kitchen. I know when I was in quarantine, I had my own kitchen utensils, my own plates, mugs that no one else used, and they were washed separately in the dishwasher, and everyone that came close to me dropping food off had masks and gloves on. So, and I'm delighted to say that no one in my household caught it. We were one of the 86%. So I hope that that gives reassurance that this has been thought through, and if people genuinely comply, it will be okay. Thank you, Mr. President.
Supplementary, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Just on the latter point there, would the Chief Minister not perhaps accept that he's being a little unrealistic in his expectations that people are going to have the space to be able to distance in their own homes? Couples living in a single bedroom flat, not everyone has an annex that they can just sort of go into. I just think we need to be more realistic about our expectations here, and certainly unable to police it. If the policy decision then is that the other people in the household can go out, I would have thought that the quid pro quo for that would have been an effective contact tracing mechanism that's required of the other members of the household to make sure that at least if the returning resident developed symptoms, that there was a known list of people who the family members and had come into contact with, to make sure that we could effectively go back to where we were in March, which was test, trace, which was the mantra. It seems that we're not really giving ourselves the tools to do that if someone develops symptoms when they come back.
Chief Minister.
Thank you, Mr. President. And I think we have a system where I know when I was contacted, as were my family, you give a list of everyone you've seen in the last number of days, and most of us can remember who we've seen, obviously, because it's all about longer periods of 15 minutes. It's not just walking past in a street. It's people that you've been in close contact, and then they are traced. I have to say that I am not a qualified medic in this, and I rely on the advice of our public health and our medics, and if they tell me that they are content for this to happen, then I am more than prepared to take it at face value, because the evidence that they have supplied myself, the Council of Ministers and this Honourable Court on a number of times in writing, reaffirming some of our strategies, has, touch wood, proven to be successful to date. But I put the caveat that I do expect at some stage we will have the odd case of COVID-19 coming back as a result of relaxing the borders policy. But given the risks to the rest of the economy and the mental health and welfare of people who maybe haven't seen their mum and dad or their son or daughter or grandchild for 3, 4, 5 months, that I think is a risk worth taking, given the spread rate in the United Kingdom. Thank you, Mr. President.